A man named Richard the Raker stepped onto the rotting wooden planks covering his own cesspool in 1348. The wood snapped. He plunged into several feet of accumulated human waste, drowning in a vile mixture collected from his entire neighborhood over many years. The truly disturbing part of this tragedy is that no one considered it unusual. It was simply ordinary life in medieval England. If you had walked into the world of 1348, the boundary separating civilization from open sewage amounted to a handful of fragile wooden planks. Roughly 80% of the population spent their entire lives performing backbreaking agricultural labor. The concept of germs remained 5 centuries away. The most advanced medical minds blamed millions of deaths on planets aligning in the wrong positions. You would not have survived this brutal era. Over the next few minutes, I will guide you through exactly why, beginning with the very first thing you would notice. But before we step into this foul-smelling past, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to History Echoes Hub, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a journey through time. The stench would strike you before anything else. London in 1348 squeezed roughly 70,000 people inside a walled city measuring about 1 square mile. This created a population density rivaling modern Manhattan. Of course, Manhattan features indoor plumbing and a sewer system that never empties into the drinking water. London possessed none of those comforts. Instead, London relied on the Fleet River. The Fleet flowed west of the city walls, serving as a trade route, a primary source of drinking water, and an open sewer. Slaughterhouses dumped animal blood, bones, and offal into the current. Tanneries poured toxic runoff into the water, while latrines emptied directly from both banks. The lower section grew so clogged with filth that locals renamed it the Fleet Ditch. 60 years before the plague, the odor from the Fleet had grown so overpowering that a Carmelite prior, the Dominican friars, and the Bishop of Salisbury signed a formal petition of complaint. When a bishop writes a letter complaining about a foul-smelling river, you understand how vile that water had become. The authorities solved this in 1343 by instructing butchers to dump waste into the Fleet, hoping animal remains would stop piling up in the streets. One historian noted this solution proved less than ideal. This was the baseline before the Black Death appeared. King Edward III personally wrote to the Mayor of London in 1349, complaining that the streets were foul with human feces. He warned that the city air was poisoned, posing danger to anyone passing through. The King of England had to personally order the mayor to clean human waste off the public streets. This was your everyday reality. Pigs roamed freely across the streets of countless medieval towns. These were not the plump, pink farm animals you might imagine. Medieval pigs looked closer to aggressive wild boars, complete with sharp tusks, wiry hair, and a vicious temperament. They rooted up gardens, attacked passers-by, dug up fresh bodies from graveyards, and reportedly killed small children. The Hospital Brothers of St. Anthony held royal privileges, allowing their pigs to wander the alleys wearing little bells. At least the ringing gave you a brief warning before a tusked beast charged you. Meanwhile, the city of Exeter featured a local stream bearing the official name Shitbrook. This was not local slang, but the actual geographical name printed on maps. Now let me walk you inside a typical medieval home. If you were wealthy enough to live in a stone castle, your toilet went by the name garderobe. This featured a small stone chamber projecting outward from the wall on corbels, containing a hole that dropped human waste into the moat or a deep cesspit. The word garderobe literally translates to wardrobe. People intentionally stored their clothing near the toilet because they firmly believed the strong ammonia fumes rising from the waste below would repel lice and fleas. Your finest suit hung directly above a dark shaft of human excrement by design. During the siege of Chateau Gaillard in 1204, enemy soldiers successfully breached the fortress by climbing straight up through a latrine shaft. That disgusting tactic tells you everything you need to know about the size of these openings and the determination of medieval armies. Commoners used a chamber pot at night and emptied the contents into a local cesspit every morning. Across much of medieval Europe, the most relevant sanitation legislation consisted of a basic ordinance requiring you to shout a warning 3 times before dumping a full chamber pot out your high window and into the street. That stood as the actual law. Shout 3 times and let gravity handle the rest. Cesspits were legally required to sit at least 2.5 feet from your neighbor's property if lined with stone, or 3.5 feet if unlined. Foul seepage, leaking into neighboring properties and drinking wells happened constantly. One notable legal case from 1347 involved 2 men who secretly piped their raw waste through a hidden channel into a neighbor's cellar. No one noticed until the cellar overflowed with sewage. Here is the truth about medieval hygiene that most people get wrong. The popular image of universally filthy peasants who never bathed is mostly a myth. Medieval people washed themselves daily in many cases. Cleaning your hands and face every morning was standard practice across all social classes. Etiquette manuals instructed people to keep their fingernails spotless, avoid touching their ears or nose with bare hands, and wipe their greasy lips before drinking from a shared cup. True soap had arrived from the Middle East as an expensive luxury, while common people manufactured their own harsh version using animal fat mixed with wood ash. Linen undergarments performed the heavy lifting of medieval hygiene by absorbing daily sweat and dirt, and wealthy citizens changed these garments every day. Historian Ian Mortimer pointed out that medieval society offered many ways to remove dirt beyond just soap and water. Public bathhouses operated everywhere. 32 active bathhouses lined the streets of Paris by the 13th century. Southwark, located across the Thames from London, hosted 18 hot baths. Vienna maintained 29, and Nuremberg boasted 14, earning a reputation as one of the cleanest cities on the continent. Even small rural towns often ran a local bathhouse connected to the village bakery, sharing the heat radiating from the bread ovens. A 12th century writer named Alexander Neckham reported waking up to the voices of street criers shouting that the local baths were hot and ready. Medieval illustrations frequently depict people sitting inside large wooden tubs with flat boards laid across the rims as makeshift dining tables, socializing while they soaked. The 14th century Italian physician Magnino de Magnieri meticulously catalogued 57 distinct ways to take a proper bath. Some of those bathhouses, particularly the famous Southwark stews, doubled as brothels. The sex workers who operated inside went by the nickname Winchester Geese. This moniker existed because the local Bishop of Winchester officially licensed and regulated the stews. A 15th century legal document laid out 39 strict rules governing their operation. The medieval church regulated both your personal spiritual hygiene and the intimate hygiene of your local brothel with equal bureaucratic enthusiasm. Monks themselves maintained a complicated relationship with water. Most monastic orders strictly limited full body baths to 2 or 3 times per year to avoid the sins of vanity and bodily indulgence. St. Benedict's rule declared that bathing should seldom be permitted to those who are healthy. St. Francis of Assisi went even further, considering a foul, unwashed body a badge of true piety. Yet despite these rules, monastic bathhouses existed all over the continent. Cluny Abbey maintained a massive facility holding 12 large tubs and 45 separate toilet cubicles. Canterbury's Christ Church Monastery featured fresh piped water running to its kitchen, washhouse and infirmary from advanced settling tanks as early as 1150. The church remained simultaneously suspicious of warm bathing and committed to advanced plumbing. Across the Mediterranean, the Islamic world operated on an entirely different level of sanitation. 10th century Cordoba, under Islamic rule, supported a population of over 500,000 citizens. The city featured bright street lighting, clean running water, and 300 public bathhouses. This existed at a time when London held roughly 10,000 inhabitants who used the Thames as both their primary water supply and their main toilet. Islamic teachings declared cleanliness to be half of faith, and Muslims performed ritual washing 5 times daily. Arab physicians dedicated entire chapters of their medical texts to personal hygiene, soap making, and toothpaste. Arab writers described the European Crusaders who traveled to the Holy Land as possessing a total, shocking disregard for personal hygiene. The noblest Christian knights boasted about bathing no more than 4 times a year. Medieval Europeans were not the unwashed savages of popular imagination, but compared to their Islamic contemporaries, they lagged far behind. What makes all of this tragic is that these people genuinely tried. They cared about cleanliness and built impressive infrastructure. None of that effort mattered. The one crucial thing they lacked, the one vital piece of knowledge that would have saved them, was any real understanding of what was making them sick. Disease in 1348 was explained through 3 different frameworks, and all 3 were wrong. The first was humoral theory. Inherited from the ancient Greeks, this theory held that your body contained 4 vital humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Perfect health meant perfect balance, while sickness meant one humor had grown out of proportion. Medical treatment meant forcefully restoring that balance through bloodletting, harsh purging, or induced vomiting. The second framework was miasma theory. This was the belief that poisonous air rising off rotting matter, stagnant swamps, or unclean environments caused disease. That belief explains why people carried small bouquets of fragrant flowers pressed to their noses. It explains why families fumigated their homes with burning aromatic herbs, and why people wore scented balls of spices around their necks. Servants scattered fresh rushes and herbs like basil, chamomile, lavender, mint and rosemary across floors, attempting to mask the deadly smells. This was not blind superstition, as it followed a strict logic. Rotting things smell bad. Sick people smell bad. Places filled with bad smells usually contain more sick people. The conclusion that foul air causes disease made sense based on the available evidence, even though it was fatally wrong. The third framework was the simplest and most devastating. God was angry. You had sinned, and this plague was your divine punishment. In October of 1348, King Philip VI of France commissioned the medical faculty of the University of Paris to produce an official report on the plague. 49 of the finest medical minds on the continent concluded that a triple conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter and Mars in the sign of Aquarius on March 20th, 1345, had corrupted the Earth's atmosphere. Drawing on Aristotle, they explained that Jupiter's hot and moist nature combined with Mars, causing massive rot in the air. This academic report became the most widely circulated medical explanation of the plague across Europe. According to the experts, the people at highest risk included anyone bunged up with evil humors, people following a bad lifestyle filled with too much exercise, sex and bathing, persistent worriers, and corpulent people with a ruddy complexion. If you were overweight and anxious, the University of Paris had essentially declared you a dead man walking. The medical treatments matched this flawed understanding. Bloodletting, meaning a doctor would slice open a vein and drain your blood, stood as the most common intervention. Painful plague buboes got lanced or cauterized with a red-hot iron. One popular remedy, the Vickery method, involved placing a live chicken's bare, plucked rump against the swollen bubo to magically draw out the poison.
The spirit
Theriac,
almost
a
there.
complex compound containing up to 80 ingredients including myrrh, cinnamon and opiates, had been considered a universal miracle antidote since antiquity. Four Thieves' vinegar circulated as another supposed cure. Desperate prayer rounded out the limited options. None of it worked. Guy de Chauliac, a personal physician to Pope Clement VI and one of the most respected surgeons in Europe, wrote with honesty about the crisis. He confessed that physicians felt useless and ashamed because they did not dare visit the sick for fear of infection. When they did visit, they accomplished nothing. Chauliac himself contracted the plague, suffering a fever and a massive bubo in his groin. Somehow, he miraculously survived. He had previously advised the Pope to keep fires burning inside his private chambers, a tactic which may have unknowingly helped repel the infectious fleas. Another physician named Raymond Chalin de Vinario recognized that bloodletting was useless against the plague. Yet he continued prescribing the procedure, admitting he reserved the treatment for members of the Roman Curia whom he disliked. That might be the most honest thing a medical doctor has ever recorded. As for the iconic plague doctor costume featuring the beak mask filled with flowers, it did not exist yet. A French physician named Charles Delorme would not invent that outfit until 1619, and the famous engraving of Dr. Beak dates back to 1656. Only two physical examples of these masks have been found, and both originate from 17th century Germany. If you are picturing a sinister figure in a bird mask looming over your medieval sickbed, you are 3 centuries too early. In 1348, your doctor showed up holding a sharp knife and a live chicken. The medicine was spectacularly bad, but we have not even gotten to what you were eating and drinking, and that reality is worth exploring. London's primary public water supply ran through the Great Conduit. Authorized in 1236, this system of lead and timber pipes stretched 3 to 4 miles from fresh springs at Tyburn to a large cistern in Cheapside. 12 conduit systems served the city by the mid-14th century. Water was dispensed from public taps and hand-delivered to private residences by water cobs for a fee. That infrastructure was impressive for the era. The fatal problem was that the same rivers and streams feeding the clean water supply were also receiving the massive daily output of overflowing cesspools, public latrines, slaughterhouses and tanneries. There was no separation between clean drinking water and raw wastewater. You were drinking downstream from your own toilet. Despite what you have heard, medieval people did not drink weak beer instead of water because the water was too dangerous. Historian Jim Chevalier and medievalist Tim O'Neill have documented extensive evidence of routine daily water consumption. Health manuals recommended drinking from cool, fresh springs. About 90% of Europe's population lived in rural areas, boasting access to clean running streams. Ale was consumed, but primarily as a calorie-rich energy supplement for laborers rather than a water replacement. Furthermore, medieval ales contained roughly 1% alcohol, compared to 5% in a standard modern beer. You were not safely getting drunk instead of drinking the water, you were just drinking the water. The myth that medieval people used exotic spices to mask the foul taste of rotten meat is also wrong. Wealthy people who could afford spices could easily afford fresh, high-quality meat. Meanwhile, the poor peasants who might be forced to eat aging meat could not afford expensive spices. Strict laws existed, punishing merchants who sold spoiled food with time in the public stocks. Food safety still had its own nightmares, though. Ergotism, known as St. Anthony's fire, came from a fungus called Claviceps purpurea. This fungus grew on rye grain, especially after cold or wet winters. Eating this contaminated bread could trigger violent convulsions, hallucinations, rotting gangrene, and agonizing death. Rye was a daily staple grain. This meant every day when you ate your bread, you were rolling the dice. Your teeth represent one of the few areas where medieval people had it better than you might expect. Only about 20% of medieval teeth show any visible sign of decay in the archaeological record, compared to 90% in early 20th century populations. The reason comes down to an absence of refined sugar in the daily diet. People cleaned their teeth using linen cloths, chewed hazel twigs, and herbal powders made from sage, rosemary, pepper, and salt. Guy de Chauliac recommended removing excess dental calculus and using antiseptic gargles. Gerald of Wales noted that poor Welsh peasants rubbed their teeth until they shone like ivory. The bigger problem was severe tooth wear from eating rough, stone-ground bread. The tiny bits of stone grit ground tooth enamel down over a long lifetime. When a real dental problem developed, your options came down to a barber surgeon armed with pliers and no anesthetic. This figure operated under the belief that invisible worms living inside the tooth caused cavities. Treatment involved holding a burning candle close to the tooth to smoke the imaginary worms out. Your teeth probably would not rot, but everything else about medieval dentistry would make you wish they had. It was into this world of overflowing cesspools, contaminated water, and toxic rye bread that the Black Death arrived. We now know the plague started in Central Asia. A 2022 study published in Nature traced the origin to Kara Jigach near Lake Issyk-Kul in modern Kyrgyzstan. Ancient tombstones from 1338 and 1339 cite deadly pestilence. Modern DNA analysis confirmed the presence of the ancestral strain of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that would kill tens of millions. From Central Asia, the plague traveled along trade routes to the Crimea. There, in 1346, the Mongol horde under Jani Beg besieged the Genoese trading port of Kaffa. The plague devastated the besieging army. According to the chronicler Gabriele de Mussi, the Mongols used catapults to launch their infected, rotting corpses over the city walls. Though scholars debate whether that biological warfare happened, what is certain is that Genoese merchants fled Kaffa by ship, carrying the plague with them. 12 of those ships docked at Messina, Sicily, in October of 1347. Most of the sailors were already dead. The living were covered in dark swellings, buboes oozing blood and pus. The city expelled the death ships, but the plague was already ashore. Genoa, Venice and Marseille fell by January of 1348. Florence followed in March. Paris and Bordeaux collapsed in June. By late June, the plague crossed the English Channel to the port of Melcombe Regis, and by November it reached London. It moved faster than marching armies. Giovanni Boccaccio, writing from Florence, described how the plague leapt from the sick to the healthy through normal contact. It spread from touching infected clothing or objects, like a fire catching dry wood. In his account, brother abandoned brother, and parents abandoned their own sick children. Some survivors walked about carrying posies of flowers pressed to their noses, falsely believing the fragrance would comfort the brain against the stench of rotting corpses. Between March and July, he claimed over 100,000 people died within the walls of Florence. In Siena, a man named Agnolo di Tura del Grasso wrote that he buried his 5 children with his own hands. No one wept, he explained, because everyone awaited their own death. Great pits were dug and piled high with bodies. Some graves were so poorly covered that hungry stray dogs dragged the corpses out and devoured them in the streets. Florence lost between 50 and 80% of its population. Venice lost over 90,000 citizens. A friar in the French village of Givry, who kept death records, normally counted 28 funerals a year. In 1348, he recorded 649 deaths, with half occurring in September. Across Europe, modern scholarship places the death toll between 30 and 65% of the population within 6 years. The historian Ole Benedicto puts the figure at 60%. That equals 50 million people dead out of 80 million. 500 years would pass before Florence's population recovered. Pope Clement VI, sitting in Avignon, consecrated the Rhone River so that bodies could be dumped into the water with the church's blessing. The cemeteries were full and there was nowhere left to put the dead. They faced 400 burials a day at the peak, and the Pope lost 6 high-ranking cardinals in a single year. Gentile da Foligno, the chief physician at the University of Perugia, wrote treatises on treating the plague. He continued seeing patients when other doctors fled, and he died of the disease on June 18, 1348. Princess Joan, the daughter of King Edward III, died on September 2nd in Bordeaux while travelling to her wedding. Alfonso XI of Castile became the only reigning European monarch killed by the plague, falling dead in March 1350 while besieging Gibraltar. None of their royal titles bought them an extra day of life. Desperate, fanatical responses followed. Flagellants marched through Germany, Flanders, Holland, Bohemia, and Denmark. Men stripped to the waist and organized in campaigns lasting 33.5 days, representing 1 day for each year of Christ's life. They beat their backs with leather thongs tipped with iron hooks until blood ran freely. They stopped in each town for no more than a day. Pope Clement condemned the movement on October 20th, 1349, but the public paid no attention. Tragically, Jewish communities were massacred across Europe, scapegoated as well poisoners. 2,000 Jews were burned alive in Strasbourg in February of 1349, before the plague had reached the city. They were murdered for allegedly causing a disease that had not arrived yet. 6,000 died in Mainz in a single day. 300 to 600 were burned in Basel. Clement VI issued 2 papal bulls defending the Jews, pointing out in 1348 that Jewish people were dying at the same rate as Christians. His defense made no difference to the terrified mobs. Here is the darkest irony. The plague and the terror it generated helped destroy the one thing medieval people had been doing that was good for them: bathing. In the decades following the Black Death, the belief took hold that warm bathwater opened the pores and allowed disease to enter the body. Bathhouses that had been thriving social institutions began to close. The syphilis epidemic of the 1490s accelerated this collapse. By 1526, the philosopher Erasmus observed that public baths had vanished. King Henry VIII ordered the Southwark stews closed in 1546. The historian Catherine Aschenberg demonstrated that Europeans became less clean during the Renaissance than they had been during the Middle Ages. This shift means the fear of disease made people more vulnerable to it. The 17th century turned out to be the true age of filth. You would not have lived to see any of that, because in 1348, your odds of survival were a coin flip. You would have lived in a crowded city that smelled like an open latrine, drunk water contaminated by the waste of your neighbors, and eaten bread that might give you rotting gangrene. A confused doctor who believed the stars had made you sick would have drained your blood. If that failed, he might have pressed a live chicken against your swollen lymph nodes. You would have watched 1/3 to 2/3 of everyone you knew die in the space of a few months. But if you survived, the new world that greeted you was so depopulated that stray sheep and cattle wandered through abandoned fields with no one left to tend them. Henry Knighton, a historical chronicler, wrote that many thriving villages became desolate. No one was left in the empty houses because the people were all dead. Suddenly, nobody could hire a reaper for less than 8 pence with food, or a mower for less than 12. Human labor carried massive value when so many skilled laborers were gone. Ibn Khaldun, writing in 1377, captured the weight of what had happened. He wrote that civilization was visited by a destructive plague which caused massive populations to vanish. It swallowed up the good things of civilization, and the entire inhabited world changed. And it did change. The world before 1348 and the world after bore no resemblance to each other. So many labourers died that the survivors could demand higher wages. King Edward III's attempt to freeze worker pay with the Statute of Labourers in 1351 collapsed. Serfdom began its slow disintegration. Venice pioneered the concept of quarantine. Dubrovnik passed the world's first formal quarantine law in 1377, requiring 30 days of isolation on an island. Milan, under the Visconti family, walled up entire houses with both infected and healthy people sealed inside. This measure was brutal and effective, leaving the city with 15% mortality, while surrounding cities lost half their populations. Modern public health and the notion that governments carry a duty to protect citizens from disease trace their origins back to the responses to the Black Death. But in 1348, none of that progress had happened yet. In 1348, you just had a foul chamber pot, a drafty guardrobe, a river full of slaughterhouse waste, a confused doctor who thought your humours were unbalanced, and a desperate prayer that the stars would sort themselves out. Your best clothing was stored above a pile of rotting human waste to keep the fleas away, and that counted as good hygiene. That single disgusting fact tells you everything you need to know about surviving the 14th century. Thank you for stepping back into the dark reality of 1348 with us. If you survived this journey into the medieval world, please subscribe to History Echoes Hub, drop a like, and leave a comment below about which historical era you want us to uncover next.